But I'll start off with good news, and then we're going to go to IRC because they've been everybody is working incredibly hard in relationship to creating welcoming environments for refugees and looking at translation services and all that kind of stuff. So we're gonna we're gonna jump in. But I do want to say that, and some of you I've sent data out to, and if I haven't, I will. But there's going to be new awards for any school in the entire state of Utah that has mitigated the impact of COVID on students learning English, so multilingual learners. Um, and believe it or not, the award letters are going to, which is a surprise to all of us, 39 high schools, lots of rural high schools as well, so all over the state, 22 middle or junior high schools, and 12 elementary schools. So we're going to do more investigation, obviously, but the question that comes up for all of us is, okay, usually, it's the high schools who are not doing all that well for whatever reason, or the middle schools, but for some strange reason, I don't know if it's they miss their peers so much I don't know, we don't know why. Uh, the people the schools that ended up taking the biggest impact were the elementary schools. And if it was online or virtual or whatever, you can understand that. So we're going to go to IRC first, Hannah and Olivia, and you can do it however you want. But we've all seen issues related to the Afghan refugees and their families. And I think I told you I even had a student in last year who, after graduation, went back to Afghanistan to visit his family, and then he got stuck there from Utah International. So I don't know who wants to go first. I don't know, Olivia, do you want to go first, and then Hannah?
So we have some slides that we'd love to share. Maybe if you could hover over my name and make me a co-host.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Hannah, take it away. Can you see?
Yes.
All right.
All right, can you see my slides?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Olivia, I'll start with you.
Okay. Can we hop to the next slide? Thanks,
Maybe.
Hannah. Yeah, so a brief couple of top line notes about our families coming from Afghanistan and also our work. So we've been working in Salt Lake City since about the 90s, but also have had programming in Afghanistan since around the 80s. So really trying to draw on the extent possible the expertise of our colleagues on that side of the world when pulling things from our educational technical assistance related to our students coming from that region. A couple of top line notes about our families that are incoming. First is that there is no one typical family coming from Afghanistan. There is a wide range of skills. We have folks that were chiefs of staff. We have folks that were embassy workers day to day. We have folks that were soldiers. There's a wide variety of education levels. Some of these families are exponentially smarter than me, and some of them have never written their name in their own language before. So even when we're thinking in terms of literacy, they span the gamut. There are a wide range of cultural backgrounds. Afghanistan is a diverse place. We are not seeing people from a centralized region, but rather from throughout the entire country. And there are a wide range of languages. So one key consideration, which I know all of you are really familiar with, is we would really appreciate your flexibility in dealing with these families, in providing them the resources they need, and we will intend to have grace for each other as we work through this process. Another linguistic note, Afghani is a currency. So when we're referring to our Afghan families, we'll use the term Afghan. A note about geography: Afghanistan is in southern Asia, so our Afghan students are not Arab, and they are not from the Middle East. And then the two primary languages of that region would be Dari and Pashto, but many individuals that we're seeing come to the United States speak more rare regional languages or dialects. So be sure to touch base with your language services provider, check your contracts, see what dialects are available. And if they're not available, find a way to access them. All of these families, regardless of whether they're Dari, Pashto, or another regional language, deserve to know what's happening with their students. It's new, it's unfamiliar, but they have things to contribute to the educational decision-making of their students as well. And then a note about eye contact. In Afghan culture, some individuals may look away from you. This is not a sign of disrespect, it's just a cultural differentiation. So please make a note to your educators to not be upset with families or feel disrespected if they see that happening in their classrooms. We're going to move to the next slide, Hannah. Thanks. So Utah is initially slated to receive about 765 Afghan arrivals. About 600 of those will be resettled by the IRC, and the other about 100 will be resettled by Catholic Community Services. I will make a note that this number is likely fairly low. It's an initial estimate. We're kind of feeling like it will go up over time. There is every year, due to the way that federal policy works, there's a moratorium in resettlement in the first few weeks of October. That's still true this year. It's actually been extended a little bit due to our arrivals from Afghanistan. So I would anticipate a big increase about mid-October. Our agencies are rapidly scaling up. This, for the entire IRC, will increase our arrivals from the past couple of years by about 5 times. So it's a big task. We are hiring several new staff and some staff specifically to support the enrollment of our Afghan families arriving. So know that more support from our side is coming. We would really appreciate this to be a team sport. So a lot of times we will get requests from schools for providing interpretation or translation. Technically, that's the responsibility of the school, and as much as you can take care of that on your end would really be helpful for us as we're under such an organizational challenge. And additionally, as much as enrollment activities can occur on site or close to where our families are being housed, that would again be really helpful. Even the task of pulling a bunch of staff to continuously transport families for enrollment is a big lift. So we appreciate all of the partnership from you all in the past, and are looking forward to playing on the same team for the next couple of months in a challenging crisis response situation. Can we go to the next slide, Hannah? So in terms of process, these families are undergoing security screening and vetting prior to arrival in the United States. They're arriving at the United States and then they're being processed at US military facilities. In addition to preparing to receive these folks, IRC is also staffing all of those facilities across the country. We've had about 10 to 20 people just from our Salt Lake office deployed to do that work. So intimately involved in sort of the process families are going through. At those facilities, they're receiving COVID testing, basic vaccinations, and other medical services as needed. They're applying for immigration status, depending on what pathway they're entering on, workforce authorization, and then they're also receiving essential short-term health coverage. And then once those families are cleared for travel is when they make our way to us. And if you're interested in this program, I would Google what you see at the top here, the Operations Allies Welcome DHS, and there'll be a little couple-page fact sheet that can provide you a little bit more information on what that process looks like. Can you move to the next slide, Hannah? Thanks. There are 3 main resettlement pathways, and by pathways, I don't mean families are going to different locations or there are 3 different charts of travel. I just mean 3 basically legal categories that people are entering the United States on from Afghanistan. The first is through the traditional US refugee admissions program, although I will say we're seeing not as many of those as you would think. That might be our smallest category at this particular moment in time. The second would be the Afghan Afghan Special Immigrant Visa Program, which we're seeing a couple more of. And then the third would be Humanitarian Parole for Afghan nationals. And that is where most of our Afghan families are going to fall in terms of categorization. A note on this is typically when we look at legal categories, we think that the substantive merits of a family's case will determine which category they fall in. That's not necessarily true with these families. It has more to do with what stage in the referral or application process for refugee admissions, for SIV, was the family in at the moment that the embassy in Kabul fell, really is the determining point for which category they're going to fall into. So a family that is entering on humanitarian parole could very well qualify to be an SIV or could have qualified to be a refugee, but they weren't far enough along in the process to receive that status before entering the United States. So that might be helpful in terms of thinking about what these categories mean. Move to the next slide, Hannah. I'll just go into a little brief detail about what the definition of these terms are, and then what that means in terms of their benefits eligibility and the resources available to these families. I will note that in 48 hours, this could be vastly different due to movement that we're seeing at the federal level. So know that this is changing rapidly, and once it changes at the federal level, it's probably going to be piecemeal. So some things like benefits eligibility are going to change before legal status adjustment changes, and how that's trickled down to the states, nobody really knows at this point. So be prepared for sort of an environment of fluctuating information. For our students who are entering as refugees, these will be individuals who have experienced past persecution or a fear of persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. They are eligible for the Department of State's 90-day reception and placement program. So this means we're doing airport pickup, we're preparing an apartment, we're giving them a little bit of cash money at the beginning so they can buy things like toothbrushes or whatever they might need. We're getting hot meals at the beginning. We're showing them how public transportation works and how different things in U.S. House work. They're also eligible for 24 months of extended case management. And some of that is due to the way that Utah allocates its temporary assistance for needy family funds. And some of that is due to some additional federal monies called RSS monies that come from the federal government. These folks are also eligible for most public benefits like SNAP or other TANF uses, and they're eligible to apply for permission to work. Can we go to the next slide, Hannah? The next group would be our Special Immigrant Visa Program applicants. These are individuals who are employed by or on behalf of the US government for 1 year, and they have a well-founded fear of persecution or an ongoing serious threat as a consequence of their employment or affiliation with the US government. These are eligible for really the same benefits as those in the refugee category, and some of these folks will be entering on SQ or SI parole, which basically is a step in the Special Immigrant Visa Program. And all of those folks have similar benefits. Both of these groups, the refugee group and the SIV group, we have to resettle them within a 100-mile radius to our office. So that impacts sort of which school districts they'll eventually fall into. We'll move to the next slide, Hannah. The third group that we're seeing most of our families enter the United States on would be humanitarian parole. These folks are not subject to the 100-mile radius, so they may be a couple up in Ogden or down in Provo, depending on if they have any existing family or friends in those areas. These would be any Afghan that enters the US prior to initiating either a refugee petition or a refugee referral or an SIV application. And it's very complicated in terms of what stage they would have had to get to or which agency documents them as which stage. We're seeing a lot of variability there. It is not an immigration status, so it only allows for lawful presence in the United States for 2 years, at which point they can request parole again, or they can apply for asylum. We are working on some pieces in Congress that would allow an easier adjustment of status for these families, but we likely won't have information on what that would look like for the next couple of months. They are eligible for a special program by the Department of State called the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program. And this is intended to replicate the reception and placement program that our other folks are eligible for. And it really has the same types of resources. So airport pickup, apartment setup, how does transportation work? How do things in my house work? Taking care of those immediate needs. And it also includes some short-term emergency health insurance, but they are currently not eligible for case management beyond those 90 days. That is the piece that may change over the next 48 hours. It may only be 8 to 9 months of resettlement services because Utah's unique in allowing for 24 months. So that might be something we have to change during the legislative session, but we'll see. We are working on supplemental services so that we can extend help to those families as much as possible, regardless of what the federal determination is, but that's a really fluid situation at this point, and where school wraparound services might need to look a little different, or we might need to think about how we're going to determine eligibility a little bit different, and make sure that these families don't fall through the cracks. And they are also eligible to apply for permission to work. Are there any questions up to this point? I know that's a lot of new information.
And you should feel free just to speak out, or I'm looking at the chat and I don't really see anything.
Thanks, Crystal.
You're welcome. And I'm also thinking that we're going to put this on a Canvas module so that you can distribute to registrars and to all the schools. So just so you know, Olivia, that's because yes, it is a lot of information, but it is going to be changing. So we'll have to be updating and using the Canvas system so that people can actually get credit for it. So we can talk about that at a later time.
Can I ask a question, Crystal?
Yeah, Bev.
And Olivia, you probably know what I'm going to ask anyway. If they are coming with any kind of school documentation, like any school records or anything, is there any way that we can get those ahead of time so we can, when we, right from the beginning, we know where they are, where we want to place, things like that? Is there any way to get that ahead of time if they have them? Obviously, I know that's a big if.
Hannah, I know you'll be chatting about this in a minute. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, we're going to go over some of the example documents that students may be bringing to your schools. And IRC will be having a new APA youth enrollment specialist who will be sort of the main point of contact of processing their paperwork through an intake when they arrive and sending all of that to you, the district contacts first to review. So very similar to what we do with a typical refugee case. But the documents might look a little different, and we'll talk about those differences in a second.
Also, Bev, just so you know, the document we worked on with students with limited and interrupted formal education is being edited so that it can be uploaded on the website where Title III says SLIFE, which is students with limited and interrupted formal education, and we have a document that helps analyze transcripts from all the countries in the world. So that's coming up pretty soon as well. That document for translating transcripts is already up.
Right, yeah, I have, and it'll be helpful to see the examples because I think that might be the one that I sent maybe a couple of years ago, but yeah, and I'm just glad to see that we'll have some examples. That's always really helpful for the schools as well.
Great. Thanks.
Definitely. Well, in terms of eligible benefits for some of these youth that we'll be receiving, like Olivia said, this might drastically change as we hear from Congress on the funding bill, and just state by state will look very different. But currently, we know that these families will qualify for free and reduced lunch based on their income, as well as fee waivers based on income. We're trying to reach out to the state coordinator for McKinney-Vento services to see how we can potentially more appropriately utilize those services for these families, since they'll most likely be in temporary housing for 1 to several months. It's a little unclear how quickly we'll be able to place them into permanent housing. Right now, IRC is looking at a couple temporary housing locations that would currently impact Salt Lake City School District and Granite School District. So Canyon School District is not on the docket right this second. I'll let you know as soon as that changes, Bev, if that does. And that our housing locations could shift south more to Provo area or other southern districts, or more north towards Ogden. And I will be updating those folks in districts as quickly as possible. But right now it looks like only Salt Lake City School District and Granite School District are the ones right now with temporary housing units. The process is going to look really similar in theory to, again, typical refugee cases. Some of the acceptable documents we'll go over that families might bring to schools are Siv visas, special immigrant I-94 documents, these documents called Tezkera cards, which I'll show you in a second, and then employment authorization cards. I think a great point to bring up to school staff and registrars in trainings is to remember sort of the context families are coming in. Families have just fled a crisis situation. Oftentimes the documents that they had were burned at the embassy before they were even able to get to the airport. We're seeing a lot of cases where luggage has been lost in transit and all their documents are in luggage. So the available documents that they'll be bringing is really going to vary, but we'll give examples of all those different types they could have. We're seeing a lot of translation errors on documents with names misspelled, birth dates as well. A reminder to registrars that a lot of times European dates are used where it's flipped the order of the date, so the day, month, and year. But everyone on the base will be issued some sort of travel document by USCIS in order to get on a domestic flight. So we'll have something from USCIS that shows who they are and where they're going. And like Olivia mentioned in the beginning, they're mostly receiving basic vaccinations, including the COVID-19 vaccine on base. They're staying on base for a lot longer than originally anticipated, just because of wanting to get everyone vaccinated appropriately before flying. They'll still need some follow-up appointments when they get to Utah, but they should have enough sufficient vaccinations for school enrollment.
Hannah,
yeah.
Sorry, you're mumbled quite a bit with your microphone. Could you get that a little closer, or thank
Yes,
you.
I will try. Sorry, thank you for letting me know. Is it better now? A little bit?
It's still just sounding a little mumbled. I don't know why, but
Oh, darn. I'm
the
so
other
sorry.
speakers have been pretty clear, but yours is a
It's
little harder.
off.
You can keep going. The notes on the screen help. So.
Oh, help. Okay. I'll try to speak more loud and clearly. Maybe that will help. This is the Siv visa that you may be seeing. It'll often have an English version that looks like almost like a US passport. And these slides will be available after so you can use in trainings with other staff. This is an example of like a special immigrant I-94 document. Again, really similar to the I-94 documents you've been seeing in the past. This is an example of the Tezkera document that will show, proof of age as well as proper spelling of families' names, as well as employment authorization cards that can be used sort of to verify name and birth dates. This information is a part of the protocols that Christelle was referencing on the USBE's website of interpreting past school records and school transcripts, as well as just giving a better understanding of what the education system looks like in Afghanistan and the equivalent US. So I won't go through this in a ton of detail, you can reference later, but just knowing what grades translate to US grades as well as years of school. As Olivia mentioned in the beginning, Dari and Pashto are going to be the main languages we see, with some variability with other dialects. Just a reminder to talk to schools and make sure that there's plans in place to remind staff and teachers how to use and book their interpreters and use their phone interpreting services. It's a great time to do a refresher on how to ask for those services so that there's less confusion once a family arrives of how to contact these interpreters. And just a note that on Google Translate, there is not Dari, but there is Pashto. And some families can understand Persian through the Google app, but it's not as reliable. And we always recommend a district interpreter over. But just, I know teachers sometimes have to use something in an emergency situation, just so a heads up on that. IRC has also been using Tarjimly as a free app service that has had a lot of really great Dari and Pashto interpreters, and is something that you could look into in your districts. And then these are just more reminders for your staff, school staff and teachers of ways to be more prepared and feel more ready to work with our Afghan students. Really utilizing psychological first aid skills instead of jumping right to the conclusion that, oh, these students need mental health services, but really assessing the intensity or frequency or duration of a student's behavioral challenges, or processing a traumatic experience can look different student by student. Just making sure that we're properly assessing students and not assuming that they need services right off the bat. And particularly, we've had a lot of requests for IRC to help with Afghan support groups in schools, and just want to be mindful of potential impacts around doing that without untrained mental health professionals who can really set the stage and set a safe space for students. It's not recommended to start up these groups without those trained mental health staff, because it could be more traumatizing for students to be put into a support group and asked to talk about their experience from coming from Afghanistan and being in the US, or existing Afghan students who are processing this conflict as well. Just basic tips that you all are probably aware of, but learning proper name pronunciation makes a really big difference for our students and creating a welcoming environment. Learning basic cultural and religious customs, a few that Olivia mentioned at the beginning, Afghan versus Afghani, the regional context of where they're coming from. Their religious practices are really critical to understanding and having empathy around. I want to caution folks on just asking students to share their stories or speak on the crisis, or having teachers bring up different issues related to the crisis, such as the Taliban government. Just being aware that that might be hard for students to share. And if they bring it up and need to talk about it, that is great. But just being careful around how that's approached in the classroom or outside the classroom, and not using students as like a speaking point for the crisis. Taking special attention for Afghan staff, I think, is a really important piece as we're going through this as well, because they kind of play a double role of experiencing the trauma themselves, but also being asked to interpret the cultural context or support other Afghan students as they're going through this traumatic experience as well. So they have sort of a double burden on themselves. We're seeing a lot of students respond very differently to this situation in very typical fashions that a lot of youth who are experiencing trauma can exhibit. So behaviors like anger and aggression, maybe lack of attention or lack of motivation, withdrawal from class, disobedience, or sadness. So normalizing those behaviors to school staff and understanding the connection to trauma and how those are not directed at school staff on a personal level, but just a reaction to this crisis. And then making a great attempt to really highlight strengths of students. I think that's a really great practice that staff can utilize on a day-to-day practice. So highlighting their culture, their courage, their resilience, those pieces are really critical in helping focus on positive strengths of students. And I think that's all we had for today, but I don't know if anyone has questions on further like enrollment steps. Again, the eligibility piece of benefits is something that we're really going to have to get back to you on in terms of if how long they qualify for Medicaid potentially, or other cash assistance programs. But these are the three benefits that will really impact school enrollments. And I think there's questions, but I can't see them because I'm sharing my screen.
No, there aren't any questions yet, but I think people can probably start their own video and then ask questions just kind of in general. So do you want to stop sharing your screen and then we'll go to other questions? Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, of course. I can figure out how to do that. There we go.
So
Robin asked a question about religion.
yeah,
Just wanting to call out that a lot of families practice Islam and are Muslim, and that's always a good distinction to make. Of sometimes folks use those terms interchangeably. Muslims are people who practice Islam, and Islam is the religion. So there's Islamic customs, Islamic teachings, but Afghans are not Islamic, or like they're not Islams, if that makes sense. Like sometimes get mixed up. Good question.
Thank you.
so Thais is asking a question about commonalities. It's similar to what you already said, which is commonalities across their religious backgrounds.
That's a good question. I don't know if I can speak to that in the best way, but just from the students that we're receiving, a lot of them are Muslim, and have found there are a lot of existing Muslim communities within Utah that I think families really quickly get connected to, and that's a really great support for them. And so if there's groups within your communities that you know of or near your school communities, they'll be referred to a lot of those religious communities from the resettlement agency or recommendations from community members. But I haven't seen a lot of other variety of religious backgrounds, but that might just be my limited experience with some of our Afghan students. And I'm happy if other refugee service providers wanted to answer that in a better way.
So it says, would you please repeat what you said about Muslim and Islam? So people are still not clear.
Yeah, no, good question. So Islam is the religion. So you'll often hear people say, oh, that's an Islamic practice, Islamic teaching, or an Islamic principle. But Muslim, the term Muslim refers to the person. So someone would identify as a Muslim who practices Islam. So that's the best way to think of it is Muslim isn't the religion, it's the person, the worshiper of Islam.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah.
Like Christians practice Christianity. So that's one way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. And these are great things to go over with school staff, just because it can be really confusing, and sometimes folks don't want to admit that they don't know the difference, and then it might communicate with a youth, and that could be, triggering or just, not as welcoming as it could be. So those simple things of Afghan versus Afghani, Muslim versus Islam, all those points are really great cultural awareness bringers to bring to the classroom and to faculty.
So Thais is saying, I recognize that the internet is great, but do you have recommendations for a reliable source to help educate ourselves and further in schools on, many differences in relationship to Islam?
Definitely. IRC uses a resource called CORE, and I will link that here in a second. That has a lot of great sort of cultural readings and resources that break down not only Afghan students, but other refugee and immigrant students, cultural groups that can provide a really kind of quick resource to some like 101 information about different cultural backgrounds, as well as providing a lot of great resources for families that are in their languages that help them understand US customs and practices. So it's a really great tool that provides both immigrant refugee information as well as US information for families. And I'll link that in 1 minute.
And remember, this is recorded, so all the resources that are going to be talked about today will be included in the email to send you. And I think Jerry can actually do this video in relationship to a module that we could set up so that you can send it out in your Canvas systems and they can get credit for it in Midas. I'll set that up today or tomorrow.
And Olivia and I have had a few schools reach out to us on an individual level asking for some training. That's something that we're always happy to do as well. If you have a group that you would like to listen to similar topics, we're happy to do that as well if you want to reach out. And I'll drop my contact information in the chat.
Hannah, you mentioned that Salt Lake School District and Granite School District would be the most impacted potentially by where the temporary housing goes. Do you have a general location on where that is so we can more specifically invite staff from those school areas to receive training?
Yeah, definitely. I think it would be best for us to chat offline about some of those locations. We're keeping them confidential right now, just because we're going to have such high numbers of families relocated there, and some of the locations aren't 100% confirmed. But I'm happy to share those locations with you offline and with those school districts.
Thank you.
So there's another really good question, which I've dealt with for 5 years, unfortunately. How are complaints issues addressed when they arise regarding new Afghan youth? Who advocates for them in their individual schools? Now, this is, I don't want to be a downer, but this has been a huge issue ever since I've been in this position. And I think we have to give credit to people who actually understand that, education and working with registrars and front office people are really critical in relationship to creating a welcoming environment. So the issue of complaint, I'm just going to say a really simple kind of thing, which is, it doesn't help when the resettlement agencies are overwhelmed to tell them about what's actually happening in schools. If you want to tell me, and I get those referrals all the time, and then I work directly with the district to try to mitigate whatever's going on. So if there are issues related to especially registration in a specific school or anything like that, you should contact me directly. See, so I've done this for 5 years. It's not, a kind of happy thing to do, but helping people better understand the implications of their lack of knowledge. And so we just, it's like we value best intentions and people are trying to do the best they can. But if they have certain assumptions that aren't really examined and they don't have the kind of support that they need, then oftentimes, them feeling not competent to deal with the range of issues, ends up also being a triggering event. And then their basic reaction ends up not being welcoming. So, and Beverly is asking, would it be possible to create something in the Canvas course where we can add and look for documents, resources that we may find or develop and support for our families and students? Yes, I think because this is a fluid situation, we'll have it'll be kind of like module 1, which is the basic information, and then we'll add to the module 2, and then we'll make it so that people can get credit for it. I think that's the other piece. And then Tiana says, great advocates in the school could be mental health providers, school social workers, counselors, school psychologists. Yeah, I agree with that. But the issue ends up being that some of the people that you're naming don't end up having the kind of knowledge base that working with refugees. So I'm going to switch to, if this is okay, one of the districts that has just rave reviews in relationship to resources and how to work with refugees is Canyon's school district. So Beverly is going to, so let me just add a little thing. We need more mental health resources for our refugee students. This is Victoria saying this. And I think that's the point related to wraparound services. Granite has wraparound services with their learning communities, and Salt Lake does too. So we could actually connect with the schools connected to the learning communities, which are in Rose Park and Liberty Park and places like that. And I know the person who's the director there. And of course, the Canvas course is also the front desk staff. Whitney's team is working on that, as well as the school improvement team. So there's lots of people realizing that we have to provide the kind of support. So Hannah has to go. She has to hop off. So she's leaving her contact information. And when I send this out, and Robin has to go too. Robin is doing some really interesting stuff. The next time we meet, we'll talk about what Murray's doing to be responsive. So I'll provide that information to you in an email. So Beverly, I'm going to turn it over to Beverly, and the reason I'm doing that is, again, the work that Canyons has done related to wraparound services and support, even in the pandemic, and registration for refugee families as well as resources, has been lauded by all the resettlement agencies. So thank you, Bev, for the work you've been doing. And do you want to share it with the rest of us?
Sure. And it's not like there's any magic, wand. We were really struggling a few years ago, just trying to get all of our students enrolled. So, obviously we all have our day-to-day when we get a family here and a family there. But when at the beginning of every school year, and if we know we're having a large group of families coming in, we have really started taking everything to the families. So we take laptops, and we have events, right? We take multiple interpreters, we have laptops, we have sometimes nursing services out there. We have counselors come from the high schools, principals will come to meet students that will be in their schools, so that what we try to create is a system of we want you here and we value you, and we're going to bring everybody to you, and so that they automatically have a touch point when they walk into the school. We do have 2-3 people actually that are really highly involved with our refugee families, or any family that is coming in brand new to the country. But in this case, refugees, we will, we make sure that we do a lot of that prep work, because a lot of these families come with so many kids. So we make sure we have the family access. We know what school they're going into. We've already talked with the school. The school knows we're coming with the family, and we work with all the registrars. So we just try to take everything that comes in, and we take it to either the community center. We did a registration event this year at one of our apartment complexes, and just sat out under the pavilions with hotspots and computers so that we could get families registered, answered a lot of questions, took care of a lot of needs. And then we also continue those. We do a lot of home visits then after that, following up and working together with our community school facilitators and the agencies to make sure that we keep everybody, that we're not duplicating services, and that we're also fostering independency, so that we're teaching skills. This year, we're actually getting ready to host our first event where we'll go and walk through Canvas and Skyward. We know that it's just such a fire hose at the beginning, but we'll be, and we're working on some videos. How do you log into Canvas in multiple languages? How do you call in to say that your student's not going to be there? those kinds of things like that. But we continue with those home visits and follow-ups and check-ins on a regular basis. So I'm not sure if there was much more, I mean, it's not super special, but we do a lot of work on the front end to try to make that day. We do a lot of school tours, things like that, and everyone knows we're coming out. We've pretty much gotten it down to a science where we can get everybody in, registered, enrolled, tours, and start school as soon as possible.
So does anyone have questions for Bev? You can just speak out. You don't need to put it in the. So Thais is saying, I'd like to hear
So
more about how to make those classes and how to access Canvas. We could go ahead.
Well, I'm going to let you know because this will be sort of our first one. So we're putting that together now. So we have family learning centers where families will come for, and they're not just our refugees families, but we're taking in laptops. We've got interpreters, and so we're utilizing those classes where we know families are already coming, but then also we are going to specifically be inviting and welcoming and having an event, little events at the apartment complexes. Just basically it's demonstration. Let's get on, let's do it. And the students fortunately already have some idea. So they sit, the vision that we have is that they're going to sit side by side, work through it. So at least parents have some understanding if they, we want parents to be involved in their children's education. And so we're trying to give them just all the tools. But once we get the videos and things, I'll certainly share, of course.
Beverly, can I just ask you a follow-up to that?
Mm-hmm.
When we've talked about doing them, one of the challenges that we have is that you have so many languages occurring in that class, and how to navigate that so that the parents don't feel like they're sitting while they're waiting for all these various translations to kind of occur. So I'm just curious, how do you handle that dynamic?
So one of the things that we try to do is we try to group our languages together, right? For this separate event, like when we're in a family learning center environment, it's straight demonstration. We try to do the events where we train the interpreters first, so they can be sitting side by side rather than it being one person's up doing this and then it's all this interpretation. I'll bring them all in. I'll train them. I'll give them a script. Here's what we want you to go through. And that seems to be really effective because a lot of times we're not trying to train on the entire Canvas system. It is or Skyward, let's say, how do you go in and check your students' attendance? How can you go in and check grades? Very, very specific things that we can create a script for and train ahead of time. And, we use our interpreters that are, we all have our go-to interpreters, right? That we know that we use all the time. And like for registration, we've used the same, we try to use the same interpreter. So it's not starting all over again. And now these interpreters know, they know how to text me when there's a question about something on the registration. And now I hardly ever hear from them because they just know the process now. So that helps.
Yeah, there's a question about the WIDA screener. Okay, you never do a WIDA screener like the first day. I mean, the actual federal legislation is when they come in, it should be within the first 2 weeks. And then, so, I mean, the issue goes back to what everyone has said about creating safe conditions and making sure that families understand what's actually happening with their student, because, I mean, this whole idea about if you could actually put yourself in their position related to their experience, without asking them, but really trying to better understand, what it means to be evacuated from your country. My primary care physician was a refugee and was on an island off the coast of Vietnam for 2 or 3 months when Saigon fell. So the issue ends up being more about the assets and the contributions that we have had from diverse populations from the beginning of the country. Right. So that's kind of the way in which we think about the assets that families bring and then our response to them. Other questions for Bev or anything else that you want to say, Bev?
Thank you.
We actually have a range of people from different agencies. So Adam, do you want to introduce yourself because you're kind of new to the Refugee Collaborative?
Yes, thanks, Christelle. Hi, I'm Adam Snow. I'm the new Refugee Youth Coordinator at the Refugee Services Office, which is with the state of Utah underneath the Department of Workforce Services. I've been here for just about 5 months now.
Thanks, Adam. Mitra, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Mitra, and I'm working for Catholic Community Services as the Youth Coordinator.
Thanks, Mitra.
Yep.
Also, we have an ongoing refugee collaborative where all the resettlement agencies get together. And if anyone is interested in joining that, it's a combination of a wide variety of USVE people from, adult education to, high schools people that have a commitment to working with refugees. The question from Tiana is, Bev, what ongoing support does your district provide for refugee students?
So we follow a community schools model, and we have community school facilitators. So they spend a tremendous amount of time we have a community school facilitator in our in all of our high population schools. I mean, most of our students land within a few schools. So each of those schools has this community school facilitator that is working together with our newcomer team, which consists of we have 4 people, and they are constantly working together, trying to make sure that we have basic needs met, but also highly engaged with academics and attendance, and when behavioral concerns come up, working with families. And our high school, where almost all of our refugees, in fact, all of our high school refugee students are at Hillcrest High School. We have an additional person that is just there working with transcripts and grades and opportunities, providing opportunities for all kinds of things, right? Making sure that they're getting those permission slips in, that people are allowing access to all these different things, helping them schedule courses, being an advocate for them, helping them learn how to advocate for themselves, things like that. And then of course, like I said, we're constantly doing home visits. I know I have Hannah and Olivia and Mitra and now Adam and Tim. I mean, we're just on speed dial and just trying to make sure that, like if I know something's coming up, I let them know, and we're making the calls home, but also so the case managers know. It's just trying to constantly keep everyone informed of what is going on that their families may or may not want to participate in, but we get really, really good response. And I feel like we get a lot of our families in access to those types of things because of the great outreach. We don't ask the agency specifically. We'll just say, will you let your caseworkers know? So if they're working with them, but we do all the calls, and we get interpreters. I had extra phones added into our office. So if there's something coming up big or something like that, we start calling in all the languages like registration or parent conferences or whatever. And then we also are utilizing Parent Square this year. And I've been trying to find out if Parent Square has Dari or Pashto. Does anyone know?
What was the question?
Parent Square, it's a two-way communication, and we're piloting it we piloted it in a few schools last year, but it's basically a teacher can text in English, and we help the parents set up the language. So if they speak Spanish, or I know Swahili, we've had a whole Arabic, teacher can text in English, it will translate it immediately into their language. They can come back and type in their language, and the message gets to the teacher in English or whatever their language happens to be. So I've been trying to find out if Dari or Pashto are part of their language list. And if not, I think I'll be calling and telling them they have to hurry up and get that on there.
Yeah, so this is a great segue into language services and some of the work that's being done in Ogden and other places. This goes back to a huge civil rights issue. And I'm just going to say this, because this is like a broken record because I've said this, for the last 5 years. The Department of Justice and the civil rights obligations, that's a state responsibility. Funding cannot be, Title III federal funds cannot be used for that because that is an obligation. That's a civil rights obligation. And so the way in which you fund language services is a really critical issue related to meaningful communication in a language that the parents prefer, right? So that's why registration and the home language survey and all of those things are really critical. Because if, native English speakers and their parents have parent rights, then everyone else who is a family and brings their assets of another language to our country, they have the same rights. There's a school district that now is under the Office of Civil Rights because of this very issue. So it's something not to be taken lightly because then it ends up going to the Department of Justice. I'm not saying this to be threatening. I'm just saying that this is the fact. This is a civil right, for every single family and every single student in our system. So I'm going to ask people from Ogden to talk about what they've done with language services, and then we'll have questions and we'll end with that. You should email me any questions that you want. So Thais is saying, I don't know anything about Parent Square, but we have been recommending to teachers the ability to use talking points, which is free, that does the same thing. It has Pashto, Persian, Farsi, but not Dari. And the other thing is, Robin Williams, they're piloting a really interesting tutoring program for students where the tutors actually speak, 50 or 60 or 100 different languages. So once they do the pilot program, then we can have Murray and Robin tell us about, the impact that tutoring program for students, how that has made a difference. The research is really clear. If you're literate in your first language, then your second, third, and fourth language is much easier. I worked with students last year who actually know 10 languages. So, that's the important thing. So JM or Rhonda or anyone, or Thais or anyone else from Ogden, you want to say about kind of the work that you've done with translation services, language services, and how you evaluate their effectiveness? Anything that you want to share with us?
Thanks, Christelle. Hi. Before I turn the time over to Claudia, I'd like to first introduce her. Claudia Lopez is our lead district liaison and translator. And originally in Ogden District, what is it, Claudia? I keep forgetting, is it 29 or 32 languages?
30.
32 languages. We have 32 languages spoken. And originally we had began years ago with a part-time interpreter and translator, one person for the entire district. And then we grew that into one full-time position, and that's Claudia. And then our greatest language is Spanish that's spoken. And so all the schools have folks that can interpret. But you know what? We weren't meeting the diverse needs of all of our languages and all of our families because we have 32 languages. And so I gave Claudia the challenge to find us a provider that could do that for us for interpretation services and also the written translations for when we need them. And that was quick, easy, and affordable. And Claudia led the whole RFP process and everything. So I'm going to turn the time over to Claudia, and we've just began using that. And she can tell you the time frame, and she's very good at tracking the data. But I have to tell you one thing: the hardest thing is when you go from folks relying, if you have one dominant second native language like Spanish, and you have sites that have relied on people to translate for them, it is challenging to get folks to do the paradigm shift and to have everyone utilize your interpretation service so any adult can build relationships with our families whose first language is other than English. And so we're engaged in that process, and it's slow work, but we're getting there. Claudia, go right ahead. I'm going to pass you the baton.
Thank you, JM. Okay, so I just created a small presentation that I would like to share with you. Just kind of a snippet of what what Ogden School District has done. So after we started our RFP process, we had 28 companies send in their bids. That is the first time ever Ogden School District, as they can remember, having that many bids be submitted. So that tells you how much the high need of interpretation and translation services is needed worldwide. And so that was the lengthy process, is going through each one, creating a rubric, making sure the cost was, obviously economical, but also we wanted to make sure was to have all of our languages listed on there. If you did not provide us with all of our languages, well, I'm sorry, but we have that high need. So we went with Propio Interpretation Service. So before I begin kind of telling you about Propio, we piloted this company called Marty, and we piloted them for about 3 months. And that was very interesting because we didn't get as much usage. Like JM said, our staff was kind of like, well, we already have someone speaking Spanish, but they weren't thinking of non-Spanish speaking families. And so that's where we I feel like everyone kind of forgets about that, which is what we want to remind everybody, is that we want to include all of our students and families. And so it was quite pricey. It was about 90 cents a minute per phone call. This is phone call, not in-person phone call. And now Propio offers 52 cents per minute. And then their other language was, I believe, $1. I think it was like $1.25 per minute. And then for Propio, it's flat rate, no matter how different or where this language is coming from, it's 80 cents per minute. So it could be Arabic, which is our next language that is mostly used or spoken by our families, other than Spanish. And then we have, Swahili, Marshallese, and all that stuff. So we always have an interpreter that when they call, they're able to pick up the phone and speak to them. And it has not been expensive at all, I just have to say. So we went with Propio, and they are located in Pennsylvania, I believe. And so we have our own rep here, located here in Colorado. So when we call her, she's actually located near us, so we're on the same timestamp. So it's kind of nice to be able to call her and not worry, oh, are we 2 hours ahead or 2 hours behind? So I just wanted to share that. And then they have 3 features that they offer. They have the over the phone, which is 24/7, 365, which is amazing. That includes holidays. They have over 4,000 interpreters on the line. The average connection time that we've had as experience has been about 12 seconds, no matter if you're calling for Swahili or Marshallese or any of those other languages. It's been about roughly 12 to 15 seconds, which is the moment they pick up to the moment the interpreter answers. So it's pretty cool. And then we have document translation services. And now, like JM says, where I am the Spanish translator, they use me a lot, to do the district-wide translation. I do the school plans, I do the parent engagement stuff, I do all the flyers and everything. But also that can be very time consuming. And after JM we talked about it and we thought, okay, how can we also help me so I can also help the schools, but also not leave anyone behind and get them back in time. And so we were able to also put that as part of our rubric, is we need that service as well. And not just Spanish, but we need it for other languages. If a parent comes up and asks, I would like it in Farsi, then we have to provide it in that, of course. And so this is amazing. That's why we definitely had to have all of our languages, whether it was in ASL or ASL video or a document or over the phone. And so that was our biggest requirement, was all in every single one of our languages. So right now I'll show you an example of what we've turned in, but right now we have 2 forms that we've sent in as well for document translation. And I've been very, very impressed with the company. So this is kind of what we've piloted it for. Besides Spanish, we've used it for Spanish, but this is for other languages, and they've gotten it back to us in about 3 to 4 days. And so that has been very, very helpful, and they're multiple pages. And so I'm very, very pleased with them. And then video remote. This is the one that's a little bit hard just because we do sometimes have to schedule them out, especially if they're more than, I think their requirement is 30 minutes. And so if we have, you know, a SPED or a specific IP or something that needs an ASL interpreter, we do have to schedule. Our first call wasn't as great because we forgot to add the what time we were in. And so the interpreter was logged on an hour late. And so we were able to give that feedback back to them, and they were able to actually set us up in the correct time zone. So it was really nice that we experienced it, but we actually had someone on the spot that was there that we immediately call when things like this, that we need them on the spot, and they're highly trained and everything. So we have that. And then with the video remote, they're able to use it on their laptop, tablet, phone, any device that has a camera. And it's just like, it's not even an app, it's just like a website. They sign in, we give them the code, and they're just able to connect with an ASL interpreter on the spot, just like the phone call. So that's pretty cool. One of the biggest things too that we had requested that, and our Ogden School Board of Education made sure that we had FERPA. FERPA is a huge one. I used to do data before I became the translator, and FERPA is a huge thing for me. And so that was one of the other requirements. They were like, if you can't provide us with some type of FERPA guidelines or experience of what you do in order to keep things confidential, then you know, I'm sorry, but we have to make sure these phone calls are very, very important. But we also want our families to feel like they're being listened to, but also not think that it's going to come back to them and hurt them. So we don't want that either for our families. We want to keep them as safe and comfortable as they can. So they made sure to let us know on that. Now for the interpreters, they are highly qualified. They go through a very, very extensive training and hiring process and everything. It's not just, oh, you interview one day and then you get the job the next. No, you have to go through weeks and multiple tests. And for the interpreter, which is, and those are, and I forgot to clarify, a lot of people don't know what interpretation and translation, what's the difference, or is it the same thing? Interpretation is verbal, oral, it's spoken, you know, where translation is written. And so with the interpretation piece of it, they have to do multiple oral exams, and they have to know different types of subjects. It can't just be, oh, it's only medical. No, we need them to know education, financial, all these important terms, especially because one thing that we had asked was for our SPED as well, because those are high important words that need to be interpreted correctly. And so that was another thing too that we were looking for, and that are also very sensitive to the culture. And we want to make sure, again, that our families are feeling welcome and that they can actually feel welcome coming into the school and feel like, oh, well, I know that staff member only speaks English, but I know that they'll be able to provide me with someone that speaks my language. So that was another thing. And then their code of ethics, which is just pretty simple, but super, super important. They always have a great attitude. And I've had to even make calls myself for other languages as well and trainings. And I just love how professional they are and how understanding, and they just seem very upbeat. So I'm very happy with that as well. And then here are our languages. So I need to look back, but I think we lost 1 or 2 languages, but we got 2 more back. I think Hawaiian is one, but I noticed that everyone has been talking about Dari, which is at the top. So we have Dari, and then Pashto, which I believe I spelled it wrong, but I think it can be spelled both ways. And so we both have those for written and interpretation. And so those are also available. We also have requested these, next, I'll show you in a little bit, these flyers that we're going to send out to families they're both going to be translated in both of those. So they do have those 24/7, and we've used actually both of those languages, I believe, or at least one of them. And so as you can see, we have all of these languages, and this is this year's compared to last year's. We do have quite a bit. I think we lost 2 and then gained 2. So, win-win, I guess. Okay, so I want to show you guys, this is how we started. We started in February 2021. And this was for elementary parent-teacher conferences. So this is kind of data. These are how many, you can see how many languages we served during that month. For a total of 136 calls district-wide, we only spent $812. That was a total of 8 elementary schools that used it, 1 junior high, 1 high school, and then our district office used it as well. And that was our languages with Portuguese, Swahili, and Spanish. And then you see our secondary in March was $376 for 53 calls, Arabic and Spanish. And then April, we had $142, which are just the Arabic and Spanish, but still 32 calls. So you can see the difference of the call volume, that it's still not even getting to the 1,000 yet. And look at how many calls we've had and languages we've been able to serve. So that's pretty amazing. Now we go to this year. In August, we had a total of 52 calls, and it was $413. And then we had 4 of those be elementary schools, 1 junior high, all 3 high schools, and our district department. We had Arabic, French, and Spanish. Then we had, for this month, we had $977, and that's only 99 calls. Again, not even $1,000 for 99 calls. And they could range from a minute to an hour. It just is different. And the connection time, if you can compare from August to September, 12-13 seconds, which is great. And so then we had our 8 elementary schools, our 2 junior highs, 2 high schools, and then we actually had 3 district departments use it. And then as you can see, we have that many languages. If you can compare for the languages we've used, our schools are starting to use it a lot more and notice that it is a need in our schools. And again, like JM says, it's hard because sometimes they have staff that speak that language, but we want to remind them that these are highly trained individuals. And especially when it comes to, Arabic or Bengali, we want to make sure we are communicating to the families in that language correctly. So then, okay, so this is where I wanted to show you the written translation. For this one page, for all the languages that are spoken here in our boundaries, it was only 1,650. That's a quote right now. They haven't officially sent everything over yet, but that's kind of what they sent us with. And it includes the translation, the revision, and the formatting. And so again, that's over 30 languages that were sent over. And this is what it kind of looked like. And this is what we're preparing for later in October to send out. And it's a really important day. And if you want to know more about this, JM would probably be the best to tell you more about what's going on for that day. But I do know it's an at-home virtual learning day. Now we have this one that is a 3-pager. This one is a little bit more expensive, but again, you have to think about the formatting, the revision, because it's not only the translator that does the translating, but then they have one more person that has to look over that. So they don't just, oh, here, it's done, we're ready to go. They go through specific steps, especially when they're long like this. So this one is going to be about $2,700, again, for all 3 things, for formatting and everything. And this is also going to go towards the families. So this is the first time, as I know of, that we are going to provide every single language in a flyer like this that's going to go home. Or if parents come up and say that they would prefer that language, then we're able to give it to the school, they print it and provide it to the family. And so that's, it's easy for like when you do it in Spanish, but then when I started looking at the other languages, it can get quite lengthy. I thought it was just Spanish, but now as I'm looking at it, it's kind of interesting, and I'm kind of having fun being able to see all the other languages. So that is it for us. If anyone has any questions.
And I just want to share a personal note and a story. is we had a family that their first language is Arabic, and the mom speaks Arabic, and the students were in elementary school and really struggling behavior and things, and they had shifted a couple different schools. And once we got this translation, because the mom would bring just someone that she knew, and he would kind of get aggressive, and we weren't quite sure if the messages were getting across and being conveyed accurately. But as soon as we got the ability to have a 12-second connection with Proprio, the relationship began to build between the mom and the principal and the secretary and the teachers. The students started to behave better. And it just, now the mom just comes in regularly, goes to the secretary and just pulls out her phone, and the secretary's right there. And within 12 seconds, they're talking to one another. And she's just saying, hey, just wanted to see how everything's going. Is it going better? And all that. And it just really built a great relationship where we were struggling prior to that with this family.
So thanks, JM, and Claudia, you're a rock star. I mean, the work that you're doing for Ogden is amazing. And, you know, the hope is to upscale that across the state so that, you know, kind of Utah's reputation for welcoming refugees and valuing their contributions to the economic future of Utah. You know, the more we focus on this, the more the adults can come together and create environments where families and students really flourish. So I'll get this together and send it out. And Tiana, you know, who's new to USBE but has a history in Granite, is saying the ability to communicate is vital. And the reason it is, right, is that you develop relationships that are created in relationship to the well-being of children and youth. And if we actually value life and the opportunity for the adults to work together to ensure that students have a future and their communities and neighborhoods, you know, actually are valued as assets, then, you know, that's, you know, what better profession can there be than educators? So I just want to thank everybody. Does anybody have any other questions? All this will be sent out to you, and then we'll start working on a kind of a foundational module in Canvas that you can send out to everybody, and then we'll do it in steps because the way in which things are changing are critical. And someone is just saying,
Christelle, I just wanted to. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, JM first.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know, we showed you the initial documents that we're sending out district-wide. We have two big initiatives. One, which is 24/7 immediate tutoring available to every single one of our children. That is starting in October. And we also have 3 learning days where it's virtual learning and the kids are still expected to stay at home and learning while the teachers are being trained and other things. Those are 2 examples in which all of our families that speak languages other than English or Spanish were in the dark, didn't know, didn't understand, wouldn't have understood how to help their children, make sure that this children's logged into 24/7 or things. Now, because we got the translation done in all the different languages and we have support connections set up to help the families understand how to use the tools and to support them in the work and the process, it's going to be a game changer for our students whose families speak languages other than English and Spanish. So we're just really excited about that. And we didn't have that opportunity before. So
we also have an extensive text message or a message from Adam, and he's putting his contact information. And the big thing is, you know, all these references and the people that we need to connect with, that'll be sent out in an email, not just to the LEAs that have refugees, but it'll be throughout the state. And again, you know, would anyone like to say anything else before we feel free?
Yes.
Mitra.
Yes, I have a question for Ogden. So we decided to place few refugee family in Ogden, and then so I just need a contact person in district, so I can send my document for a school enrollment to them. So can you please give me any contact information for a
Okay,
person?
so that would be me, and I'm just,
Okay.
we already have been contacted by, I'm losing track of who's been talking to us, because we do already have a family coming. We've already met with several officials about it and have set them up. And so if there's an additional one, I just need to know. I'll put my email in the chat, and then I can activate my team. We have a great team that just meets and coordinates, and like the school, because it's the parent's choice. We, just so everyone understands, for these age of students, for some of the students, there's an opportunity for our newcomer program. And so the parent has the choice to enroll in our newcomer program or stay in their homes, their school of their boundary school. And so that will be a choice that that parent makes. But what was amazing is the school felt a lot more comfortable. Even the people that we've been working with felt more comfortable. They go, oh, you already have interpretation services? We said, yes. So they had already arranged for a person to come, but we said, you know, they can still come, but we're going to be connecting and talking specifically to the mom, you know, and the dad. And they're going to be who we're dealing with. And we have that interpretation service, which just changes everything to a new level. But we've been coordinating to make sure everything's taken care of. So I'll put my email in.
Then also the other thing that I want to just mention to everybody. So yeah, I know that we talk about interpretation services. I speak Farsi and Dari, and then if you are in need of any immediate assistance for documents or for translation or something like that, I am happy to help with. And I'm familiar with Afghan culture and everything. Thank you.
So anyone else? You know, you all are kind of I have lots of favorite groups. This is actually one of my favorite for lots of reasons, because it's, you know, it's the way in which loving kindness and empathy and generosity creates different kinds of conditions for children and youth. And so, you know, that's pretty amazing. And so Jessica is putting, you can also find translated phrases on UEN.org advocacy. So that's the other thing. And we also have to update the work that we've done with UEN on welcoming, advocacy for welcoming students to America. So we'll update that, and then once that's updated with all the modules and the support that people have done here, we'll send it out to you. And I hope you're as inspired as I've been with the kind of commitment that's happening. Victoria's saying, I'd like to know more about any newcomer programs or classes. I'd like to start a class myself. You know, Victoria, you have JM's information, email. They have some really interesting work they're doing with newcomers, as well as, you know, Granite does too. But the reason I'm suggesting Ogden is because their secondary level has done really interesting things related to mitigating that COVID gap with students learning English. Ben Lomond actually is an example, as well as Ogden High. So you should connect with Ogden. Granite, of course, has the Tumaini Center. And the reason the Tumaini Center is important is, you know, it's a way in which newcomers are actually kind of socialized into the culture of schooling, which is, you know, ends up being incredibly different than any other system that our students have experienced in their previous educational experiences, or interrupted as well. So, you know, all these things are really important in relationship to creating conditions for the best possible experiences for families coming to Utah. And that's kind of what we're noted for in the whole country, is the way in which we welcome refugees and create systems to support them. So anything else? Jess, do you want to say anything about your new position?
Sure. So I can talk about that for a second. My name is Jessica Callan. I recognize lots of faces. I was the youth coordinator for Catholic Community Services for 4 years. I've been at USB for 3 years now. And starting next week, I am over family and community engagement for the State Board of Education. So very excited to connect back with everyone and get more involved. And thanks for all the work that you do.
Thanks, Jess. And I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Becky Donaldson. You know, she's already announced that, you know, this will be her kind of last year at USBE. She's one of the most extraordinary people I've ever worked with in my entire life. And that means starting when I was 5 years old. So, Becky, do you want to say anything to this amazing group of people?
No, all I want to say is thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. And Christelle, thank you for providing these opportunities for people to meet and share resources and ideas and plan for these wonderful people that will be coming to the state.
Thanks, Becky. The other thing you all can think about is the way you want to actually be a part of the Refugee Collaborative. So if you're interested in that, all you have to do is just email me and let me know that you want to be in this smaller group. And the other thing is we're trying to figure out how those incredible, promising practices and teachers who receive these amazing commendations can share in smaller groups across the state. And I'll be doing that in a very different way, probably starting in November after I visit classrooms in Provo, Ogden, and Wasatch. And they're doing amazing work. And so to do, work together that's making a difference for students is what we're all about. So I just want to thank all of you and keep inspiring each other. And thank you so much.